Pete and I experienced in Grand Canyon, I came away with a fundamentally altered view of, I'm trying to think of how to frame this, of like the nature of what it means to experience wilderness. And to explain
Yeah.
that, I think I need to back up for a second. So I think, and there are a lot of people out there who might disagree with this, which they're welcome to do. I think that as a culture, we have been encouraged and in some ways programmed to frame the idea of wilderness as a solitary experience.
Mm.
It's part of how we think about wilderness. It's part of how our great wilderness writers have written about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it goes all the way back to, Daniel Boone and
Yep.
Henry David Thoreau. And, you think about these iconic figures in the history of American wilderness, and they're usually moving through and confronting wilderness in a state of being alone. And I think many people in the world that I was part of for many years when I worked as an editor at Outside Magazine have been encouraged to think of achievement in the outdoors as something that is largely a solitary thing. You're pushing your goals and extending the boundaries of what you think is possible for you.
Yep.
Maybe you're doing it with some help from some other people, but you're going to calibrate and measure the achievement itself by whether you stood on top of that mountain or you were able to establish the fastest known time on this trail or whatever. And what our experience in Grand Canyon taught me, among many, many other things, is that there's another way of looking at this. It opened me to the idea that there's an awful lot to be gained by moving into and through and connecting with wilderness in a state of being alone. And there's a lot to be said for solitude and the opportunity that it offers for contemplation and recharging and renewal and introspection. But the way I experienced through hiking Grand Canyon was as a communal effort. It was an expression of community. Without that community, Pete and I never would have made it beyond the first leg of the journey.
Yeah.
And once I realized and acknowledged that, it kind of opened the door for me to consider something else, which is that, this hike has made me think a lot about not just this one national park that I'm particularly attached to, but all of our national parks, which I think of as one of our greatest treasures as a nation. I'm not someone who thinks of himself as particularly patriotic, but I'm quite patriotic when it comes to the idea of the efforts we've made, imperfect and otherwise, to preserve wilderness and to pass it along intact, or as close to intact as possible, to future generations of Americans, and the covenant that we uphold among ourselves to fulfill those obligations. And so I've always thought that our national park system is this incredibly cool opportunity to go out and have solitary experiences. But what I now think is that that's just, for me, not the right way to think of it, because I think some of the most profound rewards, some of the most profound experiences that are available to us as citizens of this country on our public lands is by going into and moving through them with people we love.
Yeah.
And that what these spaces do, in addition to whatever insights and epiphanies and physical transformations that they may create inside of us as we confront their challenges, more than that, they strengthen and enrich and deepen the bonds that hold us together.
Yeah.
That hold those of us who care about one another, or care about one another by virtue of the fact that we have this space that we care about between us.
Yeah.
You think about our national parks and like how people go to them. I mean, I think the people who get the most out of them, and I'm not knocking the idea of going out and doing things alone, but like when I encourage people to go to national parks, I encourage people to go with their families.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We go into these spaces with people we love,
Yeah.
and we come out of them. Almost always, not always, but almost always, we come out of them bonded in
Yeah.
ways that are stronger and more meaningful.